Hello, everybody. We'll give it a few minutes before we officially start the webinar, so just hang in there. Okay, hello everybody. My name is Ann Kolbeck and I'm Director of Partner Marketing with Rafe Systems. And today I am pleased to have Ashish and Naveen with me from both Rafe and Arali. And today we're going to talk about securing your Kubernetes infrastructure with zero trust principles. So just a couple housekeeping things before we get started. So just so you guys know, the webinar today, everybody will be on mute. If you have a question, please click on the Q&A button in the Zoom, type in your question, and we will answer it as we are able to or towards the end of the webinar. Also wanted to let you guys know that this webinar will be recorded and we will share the recording after the call or after the webinar. So about Rafe, Rafe delivers the first Kubernetes management and operations platform that's purpose-built for platform teams. Our cloud-made solution provides the automation and governance capabilities that platform teams need to standardize Kubernetes tool sets and workflows. With Rafe, platform teams at MoneyGram, Garnet Health, Verizon, and many others are operating Kubernetes environments across data centers, public cloud, and edge environments with centralized visibility, access control, environment standardization, and guardrail enforcement. As a result, platform teams are able to deliver self-service and automation capabilities for developer and operations teams. And what I'd like to do next is officially introduce our speakers. We have Ashish Kar with Arali Networks, and we have Naveen Chakrapani with Rafe. And there he is. And Naveen, I will let you take it from here.
Thanks, and Naveen Chakrapani here. I'm Director of Product Management at Rafe, based out of Portland, Oregon. And prior to Rafe, I was in various product management roles, focusing on security products at McAfee and Cisco. What we're going to do today is focus on two things. So I'll be talking about how Rafe's platform can help enable a zero trust model for Kubernetes infrastructure. And Ashish will be talking about how Arali Networks can help customers achieve zero trust for applications running in Kubernetes clusters. Just to kind of set the context, Shadow Server is a nonprofit organization. So what they did back in May was they scanned more than 450,000 Kubernetes instances. And they found that 84% of them, which is a huge number, were accessible via the internet. This necessarily doesn't mean that they were vulnerable. It just means that these instances had an attack surface open, which wasn't necessary. As I kind of walk through the slides, you'll understand the challenges and why it's hard to solve this problem in a holistic manner. So this is the content that I'm going to cover today. As far as the zero trust access for Kubernetes clusters, the infrastructure side is concerned. First, I will cover the common approaches and the problems and the challenges with each one of them. And then I'll cover the RBAC basics, a very high level how Kubernetes role-based access control works. And then I'll cover some of the aspects that you need to take into consideration when implementing a zero trust model for access to Kubernetes clusters. Let's first look at the common approaches that customers typically follow for enabling access. Approach number one is to have a bastion, and any user who has to access the Kubernetes cluster goes through the bastion. The fundamental challenge with this is you're still opening up to the world a VM with port 22, and this may not be a good security practice. And also, the problem with this approach is that all users are going to have the same kubeconfig. So if you want to figure out who did what at a later point of time, it's impossible to do that. And because you're kind of opening up the entire private network, so there's a large attack surface. So then you'll start questioning. So you made all the effort to have a private Kubernetes cluster, and then you're opening up access to the world. So what's the point? The second approach is to implement a jump host. This may sound like a better idea, but in fact, it makes things worse. So you still have the problem of asking security to open port 22 inbound. All users will use the same config as before. But then the other problem that we've seen with customers is that these become the dumping ground for all kinds of YAML and secrets. So an attacker kind of is incentivized to look at this, and there are always going to be gaps because there's so many users kind of leveraging this infrastructure. Again, as with the previous approach, presents a large attack surface since the entire private network is now accessible from the bastion. Option number 3, and this has been around for a very, very long time, it's to use a VPN solution. It works, it's better than the previous options, but there are challenges with it. Say you're running your clusters in multiple data centers or multiple VPCs. So now you need a VPN gateway per data center or per VPC. Users need to have the VPN clients running on their laptops, and it costs a lot of dollars to operate this model. Again, with the other option, so once you have access to the network, you have access to the entire network, presents a wide attack surface. And we kind of walk through the options, taking one cluster as an example. So imagine having to do this for tens and hundreds of clusters, and you have like hundreds of users. So how do you handle this paradigm? How do you get to a model where you can securely enable access for a cluster that could be located across cloud, your on-prem data center, and also at the edge? It's a very, very hard problem to solve. Okay. Let me kind of provide an overview of the RBAC model with Kubernetes, because this is important. Because not all users kind of equal, right? Some people need access to only specific namespaces because they could be application developers. They don't need access to the entire cluster. The cluster could be shared across many teams. And you could also have admin users who need access to the entire clusters. They need to ensure that the cluster is up and running, that it is healthy, upgrade the Kubernetes version, and so on. So Kubernetes implements or has this concept of role and cluster role, and this is how you control whether a user has access to specific namespaces or to the entire cluster. So we talked about the secure access model. So how do users access the Kubernetes cluster? The second consideration is once you enable the secure access model, you also have to take into account the privileges that they should have once they're able to access the cluster. So which means that you have to kind of marry the secure access approach and the RBAC. And it's the same problem. So if you have to implement RBAC for hundreds of clusters and hundreds of developers and admins, so how do you do that? You also have this problem of people leaving the company, people moving from one team to another. So every single time that happens, you have to make sure that the cluster and the configurations represent the state at that point of time. So it's again, as I mentioned, I keep reiterating, it's a very, very hard problem to solve. And typically, as I called out previously, an organization has multiple roles, and each person is responsible for a specific piece. So separation of duties and managing least privilege access is a nightmare. Okay, so there's a third angle. Spoke about secure access, and then I spoke about RBAC. But then you have a single source of truth typically in your environment, which is your IDP. How do you kind of bring that in? How do you integrate that so that based on the user and the user's group, they're assigned appropriate permissions to the clusters? And this is like the third pillar, right? So you have three pillars: secure access, you have RBAC, and then you have integration with IDP. And then you'd want to also enable MFA, stepping up the security posture. So you have to bring all these three aspects together in order to implement a very sound framework to enable a zero trust model for Kubernetes access. So let's kind of look at how the RAFE platform works. So you have a cluster, a private cluster on the right-hand side. And this cluster could be in the cloud, running in the cloud. It could be in an on-prem data center, or it could be at the edge. And note that the only thing that you need to do in terms of firewall configuration is this open 443 outbound. There's no other requirement. So what this does is this maintains communication back with RAFE controller, which is SaaS. It can also be hosted by customers, but most of our customers prefer the SaaS option. So we also have a bunch of Kube API server proxies that are accessible through internet. So this is the state. So you have a private cluster that's talking to the RAFE controller. There's a communication channel already established. And then you have a user. And again, it could be through, so we have provided a mechanism, and I'll show it as part of the demo, to initiate kubectl operations through the console itself. But then they could also be doing it through CLI, or they could automate the entire thing, right? And the first thing is they may start initiating a bunch of kubectl commands, right? So the operations that involves interaction with the Kube API server. So as soon as they do that, the first thing that happens is the user is authenticated. So we check whether the user is authorized for access, and if so, what privileges does the user have? And this again, you can integrate this with the identity provider that you have, and can implement MFA as desired. So next thing is, so we look at the user, we determine the role, the privileges that the user should have, and a just-in-time account is provisioned. So this is important, right? Because there are no accounts dangling in the cluster. So the account is created on the fly, and then it's ephemeral. So which means that once the session is ended, so we also remove the account. So this means that you have like people leaving, people moving around teams. So you never have service accounts dangling on the clusters and presenting a security concern. So once the account is created, the user interacts with the Kube API server as they would normally. Requests, responses, they're all the same. There's no difference. And then once the user ends the session, the service account, as I mentioned, is removed. Right? This corresponds to the concept of least privilege access for the least amount of time. And then you can also, every single thing, every single command that the user initiates is audited. And then you can send it to a system like Splunk or Datadog for retention or for forensic purposes. Okay, so let me do a quick demo. So what I have is an organization or a tenant, and there are multiple projects. A project is basically a self-contained logical unit. You can have a bunch of clusters and namespaces in each of the projects. So and I'll also show the privileges that this user has. So this user is the organization admin, which means that super admin can do pretty much what the user wants to. So let me pick a project, and then I'll go to a cluster. So as you can see, right on the cluster card page, you have the kubectl option. So you click on it, the a secure channel is established. And because I am the super admin in this case, I can execute any kubectl command, right? I did a get all namespaces. I can search for all service accounts. So I can do anything that I want to, and it's secure. And there are certain options that we've provided to make it easier. For example, there's this autocomplete, right, which makes it very handy. So it's a very simple experience for users to securely do kubectl access from within the context. So let's look at another user. So I'm using Okta, and the user is JTapper. Let me log in. Okay, so let me click on RAFE application. And then for this user, you can see that this user has very limited privileges. So this user is the namespace admin for a specific namespace in this project. So unlike the other user that I showed, this user has very restricted permissions. So let me open this project, and I can see the namespace because only one namespace is assigned to this user. Can't see anything else. And then there are a bunch of workloads that are running in this namespace. So let's try doing a kubectl access for this user. Okay. So if I issue a command on the lines of get pods in the namespace that this user owns, so you can see the list of the workloads. However, if I issue a command kubectl get ns, which is basically give me the list of all namespaces, that shouldn't be allowed because this user does not have the privileges to perform any kind of cluster-wide operations. So if I do that, you can see that there's an error, and this user cannot list resource namespaces because they don't have the permissions. So let's go back to the other user, and I did a get service account, and you can see that these were the service accounts that were previously there. So now if I run the same command, so you can see that JTapper got added, and the user was added 66 seconds back, right? So just as I was running all those commands, it's the first time I initiated the kubectl command from the other user. So it was checked. The right access was, the service account was created with the right access. And as you can see, it was created just in time. I can go look at the audit logs. So you can see a kubectl section, and let me filter based on the project. Okay, for some reason it's not working. So let me go back and show another thing. You can also see that there is a mechanism to implement break glass. So what this means is, so you can go and then you can switch on, switch off kubectl access, and you can only enable it when it's needed. So when it's not needed, you can just switch it off so that you don't have users being able to do kubectl access all the time. So only when you go and then switch those settings on implement break glass, so users are able to do kubectl access. So you may have a model where you have application developers that you don't want to provide access on a day-to-day basis, but if there's an issue with their applications, so you just go and implement break glass so that they can do kubectl access, look at the logs only for a specified period of time. Going back to my slides. So to summarize, what we saw was in terms of the security aspects, the number of options, but then to kind of implement a secure access paradigm, you want to make sure that that attack surface is contained. You ensure that the user privileges, once they're able to get access to the Kubernetes cluster, is restricted, have the right privileges, implement MFA if needed, always follow the least privilege access model. And it's important to have audit trail kind of capturing all of the commands that the user has issued. From a governance standpoint, integration with IDP for SSO is important. Kind of talked about FML account and just-in-time service account. Those are important aspects to think through as well. And then the last thing that I did not show, but I spoke about, was streaming all of the audit logs to a SIM so that they could be retained for forensic purposes. So RAFE is also excited to announce that this capability is now open source. So we open sourced it last month. So all the capabilities that I showed is available with the open source version as well. So it's called Parallels. Please feel free to try this out, give us feedback, join the Slack channel. We are happy to hear your feedback, and we want to make continuous improvements to make this better. We've already had a lot of traction, excitement among users. So please give it a try and let us know what you think of this. And with this, I'll hand the platform over to Ashish. Ashish, all yours.
Yeah, actually, just 1 minute. There's a question that came about 5 minutes ago before we hand it off. And the question is, does client kubectl connect to Kubernetes cluster API directly or proxied through RAFE? And then how does kubeconfig cert invalidate by API server?
Yeah, it gets proxied through RAFE. So you have to download the kubeconfig from the from RAFE's console, and then there is a mechanism to invalidate the kubeconfig, right? So that the cert is invalidated and the user cannot access the cluster anymore. If you want to revoke access, that's possible. So how do you restrict kubectl access to cluster? In our model, I was not able to show the settings, but there's a model where you can basically lock down and you can allow access only through the RAFE platform. And there is a setting where you can say, I want users to access only through the web console or through the CLI, or you can block both as needed.
All right, great, thank you. And let's go ahead. And Ashish, let's move forward.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you, Anne. I'm Ashish from Arali Networks. Arali is a zero trust based solution that is focused on cloud native environment. We enable teams to build resilience and capabilities to survive intrusions. You can think of us as an IDS IPS solution providers focused on cloud native environment that is based on principles of zero trust. We are a fast growing company, and I'm proud to announce that we were the finalist at the RSA Innovation Sandbox competition this year, where the RSA committee selects top 10 most innovative startups from across the globe. Next slide, please. This is real. Teams are spending more on cybersecurity, yet the number of breach and its costs keep going up. Based on the latest Verizon database investigation report, popularly known as DBIR, app end users make the lion chunk of assets that are breached. And that's why it's critical to focus on both of them to reduce your cyber attack. Next slide. When it comes to app, breaches are seldom due to one misconfiguration or vulnerability, but due to a series of unmitigated risk. If you think about this famous Capital One attack, we saw three things happening. One, the WAF had a vulnerability that led to SSRF or server-side request forgery. Two, the IAM credential on the VMs were over-provisioned. It had no need to have access to S3. And finally, the S3 itself was not restricted to a VPC, a series of vulnerability that led to a successful breach. Next slide, please. One of the big challenges is that the cloud controls that are offered to us are not very consistent. As part of the shared responsibility model, yet we are supposed to securely program them. For example, If you think of cloud resource, you have to configure IAM with least privilege policy. Similarly, containers and Kubernetes brings its own set of controls and have a very different configuration paradigm. And finally, apps running on virtual machines rely on traditional controls like firewall and security group. Now think about all these mix of configuration, and this is where any misconfiguration here leads to overprivilege that an attacker abuses to move around in your environment and exfiltrate your data that leads to material damage. On the other side, if you think of timely detection, that is equally complex because we are collecting tons of logs and we have to correlate them from multiple sources. And it's often hard to find actionable insights in a timely manner. Next slide. Despite these gaps in cloud control, your goal as a security professional should be to build capability around people, process, and tooling that allows your app to be more resilient inside out. To get to a place that allows you to operate confidently without a loss in business continuity, even if an intruder gets inside. And these aspirations bring us to principles of zero trust. Look, I understand the term zero trust brings different memories based on your previous interaction and experience. I also know that there are a lot of companies that abuse the term or talk like it's a silver bullet, but I want you to open your mind and understand the core tenets of zero trust here. If you're following zero trust, think of your data as the President of the United States. At any point in time, your Secret Service or your security team should be able to do three things. One, know who the president is or be crystal clear on what you're protecting. Two, know the set of people who have access to the president or create least privilege access policy around it. And third, keep the list of people who have access to the president updated and identify if there is an imposter. This is same as monitoring and maintaining your policy. If you can do these three things consistently and continuously, then you have conquered the promised land. Now, you can apply these principles in different ways. When zero trust is applied to user, it's called ZTNA, which is what Naveen talked about. When zero trust is applied to network, it's called microsegmentation. And when zero trust is applied to your cloud workload, it's called zero trust for app, and that's what Arali does. Next slide. Let's quickly double click into these three areas. Zero trust for users was made popular by Google in early 2010 in response to a massive state-sponsored attack, and it's now called Beyond Corp, and it's generally a replacement for VPN. The second incarnation of zero trust was in form of network microsegmentation based on IP. This was fine when you were restricted to on-prem world, where apps and IP were static, but it does not work well in a cloud-native environment where your Kubernetes cluster is churning tens of thousands of IPs in an hour. The third incarnation of zero trust is focused on cloud-native apps, and that's what Arali represents, where the underlying technology is based on attested identities versus relying on IPs. These attested identities are continuously authorized to ensure that right apps have access to other apps that they're allowed to see or talk to. Now, in this case, imagine if a threat arrives in your environment, it cannot talk to any other app. Since A, it does not have the valid identity, and B, it doesn't have the privilege to do that. Next slide. This is how a continuous privilege graph looks like in Arali. So there are a few things I want for you to see here. So first and foremost is how we create normalized service identity, which means a process might be running on a VM, in container in a Kubernetes environment, or even behind an API. Yet we are able to draw this unified view. Two, we automatically create a graph of how these identities are interacting with each other. This gives you the ability to view and approve the right interactions here, which in this case are shown in green. Finally, you can also enforce the right interaction here, green in color, to get to zero trust. In that case, any bad interaction will be denied by default, a very strong position to be in. If you think about the paradigm of denial by default, it has been a gold standard in security. But the greatest challenge is, how do you create these policies and how do you maintain them over the life cycle? And this is what Arali allows you to do out of the box. This is one message I want you to remember from today's session about Arali technology, that Arali creates and maintains least privileged policy for your apps over its life cycle. Now, if you think back about the zero trust slide that I showed you earlier, there were 3 questions that we had posed. One was, do you know who is the president? And that's done by giving identities to each player here that you can see. Do we know the set of people who have access to the president? That's done by creating all these least privileged access policies that you can see here in green. And finally, keeping the list of people who have access to president updated and identifying the imposter. And that's achieved by doing a continuous monitoring and maintaining of these policies. Next slide.
Actually, first, there's a question on this slide. This looks like a whitelisting or allow listing approach. Can you talk about the advantages of this approach?
So this is an allow listing approach. So traditionally, security was based on a blacklisting approach or a deny listing approach, where you had to tell that, okay, what things are not allowed. But if you think of the blacklisting approach, it's an infinite problem, because every day new signatures are discovered, there are new vulnerabilities, and the list keep growing on and on and on. In comparison, if you move on to an allow listing approach, which is very difficult to do, what you're doing here is just identifying the right set of behaviors, which are handful. And if you can lock your app down to follow those set of behaviors, you have achieved your objective, because the app cannot do anything new. It cannot be exploited. So that's where there is huge advantage of having this paradigm. But the biggest challenge has been, how do you create these policies and how do you maintain the policy lifecycle? And that's what Arali does out of the box for our customers.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Anne. So as a byproduct of the attributes that we discussed around allow listing, Arali shielded apps becomes unexploitable. Asset can only do things that are allowed to do based on these least privileged policy. This means even if an attacker or a threat get into your environment with a stolen credential, it will not have any privilege. I want you to take a pause here and think about this attack vector. We commonly hear about the story that, hey, my developer accidentally put keys in GitHub or keys got stolen. It happens for any reason. But in this case, attacker will not be able to access your app, even in that case. Very powerful position to be in. Similarly, if you think about file-based or fileless threats, these are like very common in form of APTs and other malware that you hear. They will not be able to talk to your other apps, or they cannot connect to a backdoor to download their next level of payload. Again, a very interesting byproduct if you're able to follow this paradigm. Next slide. Now, when it comes to deployment, Arali deploys with a single command that covers all the nodes of your Kubernetes cluster. It runs as a daemon set where Kubernetes takes care of installing Arali on every node as they come up. In case of Rafe's customer, Arali can be self-onboarded using Rafe's recipe and creating a blueprint with it. In case of VM, Arali can also cover your VM and can be installed like any app using Chef, Puppet, Terraform. Or you can even burn it into the base AMI itself, so that when the AMI comes up, then Arali automatically gets installed with it. Now, Arali collects all this information and it sends to its SaaS backend, where we create these least privilege map for your app, what I showed you earlier on. Finally, Arali leverages the eBPF technology, which makes Arali highly performant. And it also allows our customer to operate in no-harm mode, where you're getting all the visibility, but you're only using it for detection purpose. Next slide. Now, coming to the use cases, some of the common use cases include access management, which includes automated IAM for your apps, passwordless access for any SaaS, and also workload segmentation. The second set is around vulnerability management. This is another very distinguishing feature. And here I would like to share two stories. One I'll share here and other will be in form of a demo. So in January this year, we had a customer who was running a critical application with critical CVEs. And we were like surprised that, hey, we know that you have this critical application. Why are you running it in this form? And they said it's impossible. There cannot be any CVEs because we use Snyk that goes and scans a repo. When they further investigated, they figured out that their developers were pulling images from GitHub. And this highlights the importance of actually knowing your ground reality and understanding what are the vulnerabilities in your runtime. For the other story around Log4j, we have a demo, so we will run that in a bit. Now, finally, coming to the third story, the third use case or third category of use case, it's around threat management. So we covered threat management to actively discover threat in your environment. We also provide backdoor detection as a service to detect and neutralize malware or attackers that are in your environment or trying to connect to your backdoor. As you know, connecting to a backdoor is a critical step if you think of the kill chain. So by neutralizing the backdoor, it's a great value add for your customer. If you can eliminate all your backdoor, you are in an awesome position. And we provide that as a service to our customers. Next slide, please. And now coming to the story of Log4j, I want you to think about three questions before Anne plays the video. One is, when Log4j happened, were you able to pinpoint the assets in your environment that had Log4j on day one? The second is, it took 4 weeks for patches to be available. And during that 4 weeks, how did you reduce your risk? And third thing you should think about it, did you ever wonder if you got compromised between the exposure time and patch time? So with those three pondering points, Anne, can you please roll the video?
Sure thing. All right.
On December 9, 2021, Log4j vulnerability was publicly disclosed. It is a big deal because the attack surface is huge, as a lot of custom third-party and open source apps use it for logging. The vulnerability allowed adversaries to use JNDI to look up and connect to adversaries' LDAP server and get a payload in response. The payload would assist with remote code execution on the server. This could lead to many things, including creating a command and control channel for a persistent and stronghold on your assets. Remember, this is a general class of attack of exploiting an application vulnerability and then moving laterally and establishing command and control. This is the demo setup. The vulnerable Log4j app is running as a container on a VM. We will pass a carefully crafted curl command to make the container connect to a remote LDAP server running in browser. Once the connection is established, the VM can pass command back to the container to do remote code execution, including creating a reverse shell to a VM in UAE, which will allow us to gain full access to the asset.
So, Anne, can you just pause because the voice is not coming through properly? So I can just give a quick overview of what happened. So till this point, what we were showing was how the Log4j vulnerability is used to attack. So essentially, there are a few components. So the first component is that you have the app which has the vulnerability. Then the other thing is that from any Mac or any device, you could have attacked the application that had Log4j vulnerability and could have created a backdoor and then executed any remote commands there. And that's what we showed till now. And now we are going to show you a terminal where we are going to carry out that attack. So, yep, go ahead and please play it again.
Just one moment, I had to log out, so here we go.
No, and the video is not complete.
So the video, got it.
Yeah, I was just explaining what happened because the quality of video is.
If we crafted curl command with JNDI that connects to the LDAP VM browser, IP 104.41.3.1. It will result in remote code execution which will download SOCAT from GitHub and create reverse shell to my server. The exploit work, and I have a reverse shell on the container. If I do ps-ef, I can see the process running on the container. Now coming back to the around UI. This is how the app looks like in normal operations. An ingress coming in to each of the Java and SSHD process and no egress connection. There is also a dark bomb here depicting that container and the process have vulnerability. Clicking on the container vulnerability, I can see log4j vulnerability. If I change the view to application plane, I can get a stable view of what happened. Here I see my personal laptop IP connecting to the front end and then a connection going to LDAP. After that, you can see a connection going to GitHub to download SOCAT, which will be used to execute the reverse shell. Since these are unexpected behavior for the app, they get flagged as red lines or alerts. If I go to the alert page, I can see a list of alerts which are sent to the SecOps team. Now coming to remediation. Unlike other tools, Arali can remediate your vulnerable processes via resident patching. I can select the right connection for the container and turn on resident patching on the vulnerable app. In this case, only ingress is allowed and no egress, which means that the connection to the LDAP server is effectively blocked out. Let's go back to the terminal and rerun the command. This time I get nothing, no response. There is not much I can do as an attacker. With Arali, you can both detect as well as remediate log4j class of vulnerabilities till your team upgrades all your impacted application. If this sounds interesting, go to aralinetworks.com for a free trial. Thank you.
Yep, thank you, Anne. So just giving a quick summary here. So you saw the attack happening, and we again drew a diagram of how your normal application behavior is. So the day when Log4j was discovered, you could have quickly looked through your apps, and we would have told you that, hey, these are the apps which are infected. Go there and look for all the green lines and then lock it down. That's it. After that, any attacker or attack that happens on your environment is automatically protected because we are not allowing anything else apart from those green connections to go through. So it's a very easy way to get to a quick resilience when these vulnerabilities are disclosed. And this is like some of the benefits here that I quickly want to call out, that when it comes to the security aspect, we help you identify a backdoor, we help you monitor third-party unpatched or even privileged container. And we also help you to monitor software supply chain attacks as well. And this is very critical because I think these days you hear a lot about these supply chain attack. And if you think about any supply chain attack, it's like a random behavior that suddenly happened because your supply chain was infected. So it was trying to do something new, going to a backdoor or something similar. And we right off the bat catch those activity and make sure that we are able to detect and stop those kind of attack. Similarly, when it comes to compliance, there are like different things that you have to demonstrate when it comes to compliance, and we give it out of box for your team. Next slide.
Real quick,
Yeah.
there's a question here. If I have 50 apps, where do I start?
That is a great point. So I didn't show a full demo of a product, but when it comes to zero trust, one of the way to think about is think about your protect surface. What do you want to protect? And Arali prioritize some of those elements for you. And it could be based on if you have database, if you have vulnerable app. So we automatically prioritize and tell you that and nudge you that, hey, these are the things that you should go and prioritize and fix first. And again, zero trust is a journey. We don't expect anyone to protect everything, but what we want you to do is have the knowledge that what are the top risk item and go and lock it down. So that's the way where we cover like customers who have like hundreds of apps. You start with one app and you incrementally cover one app at a time. So that's how it happens.
Great.
Yep. So in summary, what I wanted to also tell you is that if you want to take Arali for a spin, you can definitely get a free trial by going to aralinetworks.com sign up. Or if you're a RAFE customer, you can find us in their security recipe section, as I showed in the screenshot here. In addition, it would be awesome if you can follow us on LinkedIn or Twitter, or feel free to join our Slack community. We are pretty active there, and we can also help you with the free trial there. I think that's it from my end. Back to you, Anne and Naveen.
Great. Thank you, Ash. So with this, we'd like to open it up for some Q&A. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to type them into the Q&A section of Zoom. And actually, Naveen, I actually see one here for you. And if you can go into more detail about this, can you please discuss and demonstrate Kubernetes disaster recovery capabilities? Or how would you like to answer that one?
Yeah, is it okay, Anne, if I start sharing my screen again?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So with RAFE's platform, you have integrated backup restore capabilities as well, the section that I'm highlighting. So you can basically set up backup policies the way you want to, just back control plane components or data plane as well. So you can pick and choose what you want to back up and then automatically restore at a future point if needed. So we've integrated backup restore capabilities. So I don't have the time to demo this, but we can share material around this after the webinar. There was another question. So discuss your experience in regulated sectors where compliance and data residency are of the essence. So we have many customers in the financial services and the healthcare industry. MoneyGram and Guardant Health were a couple of them called out by Anne. So we have case studies. We can definitely share those as well, so that you get a better appreciation of what customers who are operating in regulated industries are doing. And there are a couple of things that I couldn't show as part of the demo. So let me kind of quickly walk you through that when I have the opportunity. So one thing that I wanted to show was the ability to disable kubectl CLI access or the browser kubectl access for a specific cluster. So you could have a model where for clusters that are not production, so you enable access and based on the user's privileges, they're able to execute kubectl commands. But for production environments, you could disable this and only enable break glass when it's warranted, when there's an issue with the application and a developer wants to look at the logs. So only in those specific scenarios, you can enable access. And also in terms of audit logs, I mentioned that every single kubectl command is captured. So for example, I can filter by project, and then I can filter by user. And these were the two commands that I issued, if you remember, at the beginning of the demo. So every single kubectl command issued by users is captured, and then the API logs are captured too. So this makes sure that you have like an immutable audit trail. And in fact, if you need to go back and then look at what really happened, so you can use these logs as a reference.
Great, thank you. So if you have any other questions, feel free to type them into the Zoom. And Naveen, if you want to go to the next slide, while we wait for people to type in questions, if you have, for next steps, we have some documents that we'd love for you to review. Ashish mentioned it before in his previous slide. If you go to the documentation section of the RAFE website, you can see their rally recipe. You can also sign up for a free demo and start with us. We'd love to have you join us. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. And I want to thank everybody for joining today. Thank you, Ashish, and thank you, Naveen.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you, Naveen.
Thank you.